Tell them when I go upstairs, I'll tell me you're ready to go.
Gamers don't know how to talk to one another?
We breed antisocial behavior, you know that.
Really?
I thought it was the same time. Okay, well, next week. So I
Makes her for fake development.
do you happen to have her game collector on Steam? Yeah. Okay. I got
Every humble bundle that comes out, it's like mine.
Like, do you play all of them? Like, I know, like,
Doesn't matter.
hundreds of them for no reason. Actually, I played most of them. I still love how you got the Oregon Trail mixed up with the Oregon Trail,
Oh.
and you made me play that.
The Oregon Trail, is that how good?
I'm only hearing part of this conversation, and it's very weird.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, the original one. The new one. Oregon Trail.
You died of dysentery. Actually, every time I played, you died first. Oh. Right off the bat, I think it was a dysentery and a broken leg. I know, actually, we have a how you die with a broken leg. Once the bone is like sticking out, protruding from your body. Just all the way.
Tom, I see the on-air sign. Do you want me to begin?
Tom, do you want us to start? Earth to Tom, Earth to Tom.
Oh, that's why
We're on the air. Are we starting?
Do some lines off Platos. Yeah, we're all set. Go ahead.
And here he is, Dr. Stanley Barron. Sorry.
Thank you, Lauren. Everybody, thank you very much. Welcome. Thanks for coming out in the bad weather. And if you happen to be watching this on the internet, welcome to Bryant University. I am Stanley Barron. I'm chairman of the communication department. And tonight's speaker is my former doctoral student, Warren Spector, who got everything done for his PhD and then decided that it would be more interesting and more fun to write comic books and create board games than to be a stodgy old professor. He'll tell you his story, how it went from that to becoming one of the world's preeminent game designers. I'll tell you very briefly, because I know you came to hear him and not me, but when I ran the doctoral program in our department at the University of Texas, and we had some smart guys, but there's nobody I met then and nobody I've met ever since that is as absolutely fundamentally enmeshed in the popular culture. Music, television, radio, now games. We didn't have video games back then. Movies. Warren knew everything. He could talk about everything at any level. He could talk about it as a fan. He could talk about it theoretically. Just one of the most delightful guys there was to talk to, and just as a friend, a wonderful human being. And if you want to know how sensitive this guy is, he did a brief presentation this afternoon for a computer information systems class. And his first slide said Bryant College. And I told him that we were no longer Bryant College. And out of sensitivity to you, he went and redid his presentation to accurately reflect the fact that this is indeed Bryant University. Anyway, my really good friend and one of the best, smartest guys you'll ever meet, Warren Spector.
Thanks, Stanley. Now I have to live up to that. Okay. Well, I'm going to assume that a lot of you have no idea who I am, and so I'm going to start by telling you a little bit about myself. Not because I think I'm so special or I think my biography is so incredibly important, but because I believe that my life in games reflects a lot of people's lives in games. I've been there for the start of a new medium. I've been there to see it grow and become more of a cultural force. And I think my experience growing up was frankly pretty typical of folks who grew up when I did, which was way before any of you guys were born. So I want to start with talking about who I am and how I got where I am today before I get to the real substance of the talk, which is what makes games unique, wonderful, and important. So, this is me. I've always been a bit of a geek, though I started out biting bars on my cribs, not chicken heads. So anyway, I just thought that was a cute picture. I've always been a bit of a geek about sports. I mean, maybe you play lacrosse here, but trust me, when I was growing up, nobody played lacrosse except me and a handful of other people. That was me thinking I was so cool because I could hold up a fork and pretend I was commenting on the events around me at a wedding. Yeah, I was not cool. This is me in college when I was your age. I've always wondered if that was me at the police station or somewhere else. I have no idea. But I was kind of a geek of the sort that you could be back then. The first movie I ever saw was Seventh Voyage of Sinbad, which is an amazing special effects fantasy movie when there weren't fantasy movies all over the place. Stan Lee and Jack Kirby are some of my personal heroes. I got to meet Stan Lee, one of the biggest moments of my life. I could recite the science fiction novel When Worlds Collide and the entire collection of Tom Corbett's Space Cadet for you if you want. I don't think you do, but I could. Back then, these were the things that people thought were destroying the youth of America and of the world. Famous monsters of filmland, cartoons, and H.P. Lovecraft put you in this kid's going to be a juvenile delinquent territory, or at least this kid's going to be in therapy for the rest of his life territory, which I think just goes to show how little we actually know. It was a completely different world. I mean, these were the things that people thought were going to destroy everything, which makes me always think William Goldman, who's a screenwriter, said, "No one knows anything." He was talking about Hollywood, but I think you could just talk about the world in general. No one knows what's going to be important. No one knows what's damaging. We'll have that talk later, Dr. Barron. Back then, games looked like this. There were no games when I grew up. There were, Go and chess and Monopoly. And I played them all, but they weren't anything special. They were just a way to pass the time. So that's how far back I go. And computers, this is what computers looked like. I mean, when I was about 7, I walked into a Honeywell showroom. Honeywell, who remembers Honeywell? And a guy in a white lab coat tried to throw me out because computers for scientists who wore white lab coats. There weren't any computers to speak of, certainly not in homes. But then, in 1977, I discovered this. Okay, I discovered Dungeons and Dragons, the very small games from Steve Jackson Games, and the bigger, more immense games by Avalon Hill. And at that point, I was kind of doomed. This was me in grad school. This is when you remember me. I was surrounded in this picture by everything that was important to me, all that high-tech stuff like 16mm projectors and 33 1/3 LPs, and I was still cool dressed in my overalls. I don't know what I was thinking. But if you look closely at that picture, you can see a sea change, not just for me, but for the world. Those funny-looking dice, okay? Some of them are 4-siders, some of them are 8s, 12s, 20s. I even had a 100-sided Zakihedron. I was talking to someone earlier today who had one of those as well. Those dice provided me with some nerd cred, I hope anyway. And D&D, in a very real sense, did change the world. But why was it so important to me? Why did a pastime that most people thought was just for kids, why did that appeal to me so strongly? I mean, I was working on my master's degree and then my doctorate, and I was completely obsessed with this. What was it that kept me playing several nights a week? Simply put, it was the joy of unbridled creativity. It was, my gaming group we'd create our own adventures, and we would tell stories together. It wasn't about rolling dice. It was about creating characters and telling our own stories. At its best, I mean, I don't know if you remember this episode of The Big Bang Theory, but this is where the characters are playing D&D, and I think they nailed it. It wasn't about rolling dice. It was about telling stories with your friends. And in the late 70s, I was married to movies and television and radio, but I was having a fling on the side with this game stuff, and things were about to get serious. I mean, this was my first GM. I don't know how many of you know Bruce Sterling. He was is a science fiction writer created the cyberpunk science fiction movement. He was my first game master. I wrote with, I played games with a bunch of writers. It was pretty remarkable. But something else was going on in my life at this time. That. And we need more volume on the sound, by the way. There's no sound. There we go. Very high tech, very high tech. This was the highest tech thing in my life until I got one of these, the Atari VCS. And at this point, I didn't know it yet, but I was well and truly doomed at this point, along with millions and millions of people in the United States and around the world who were officially doomed to be gamers. All of a sudden, I wasn't alone. I wasn't one of the few nerds in the world. There were, back in the late 70s, early 80s, there were more than 15 million people playing Dungeons & Dragons alone. Forget about all the other games. 15 million active players worldwide. So I was a gamer, and I was roaring. Games weren't anything nerdy anymore, particularly. Well, okay, they were totally nerdy. But they were just how my friends, my adult friends, and I socialized together. And then, before I knew it, I was hot rodding my Atari 400, adding 32K of RAM to bring it up to 48K. 48K of RAM, man. That was, by the way, 16 more than was in that Honeywell computer I showed you a picture of before. Yeah, nothing prepared me for this. And then the world changed again. It was 1979, and a gamer friend of mine invited me over to his house for a party. I promise this will all get to stuff that's interesting at some point. But he invited me over to his house. He was the first guy who had a real computer, a TRS-80, and later an Atari 800 like the one over there on the screen. And I walked into his house, and instead of a party, I saw all of my adult friends sitting there in the dark, you know, lit only by the phosphor dots of the biggest TV anybody had ever seen at that time, 25 inches, okay? And they were playing a game, and it was this, Star Raiders. I'll never forget the day I saw that. It was absolutely life-changing. And that this was mind-blowing. You've got to remember, it was 1979. And then I saw this. It wasn't just Luke Skywalker. It was me doing that stuff. So next thing I knew, I had dropped out of a PhD program. My mom cried for 10 years. I took a minimum wage job making games at a little company called Steve Jackson Games, where I got my PhD in game development. That's me. This is my lovely wife right here. Anyway, you don't care about that. But I was making games for a living, okay, and getting an education from Steve in game design. From there, I left and went to TSR, the folks who made Dungeons & Dragons, and I worked on a bunch of stuff there, a bunch of game modules and Marvel stuff, and the Buck Rogers Battle for the 25th Century board game, which no one remembers. But I was also playtesting the first computer games based on AD&D, on Advanced Dungeons & Dragons. And I remember thinking, wow, these games are not very good. They really don't capture much of what I love about D&D. And there were way cooler games out there, which I'll come back to in a second. But I was working on all this kind of stuff. And then it's a story I told earlier today, but I'll tell it again because most of you weren't there. I had an epiphany at one point. I was sitting in my office working on a new game system. And in one hand, I had percentile dice. And the other hand, I had D20s. You know, you probably don't even know what that means. But two different kinds of dice. And I realized that the biggest decision I had to make in my professional life was what kind of dice do I use in this game system. And at that moment, I said, I'm finding another line of work. And so I went to Origin, where they made these really cool Ultima games, and got schooled by Richard Garriott, and had the honor of working on games like this with amazing teams. And we thought we were going to change the world, and this is what we thought was going to change the world.
Welcome to Origin, creators of Software Worlds. This year, we're making computer gaming history, taking graphics and sound presentation to new levels of excellence and excitement. Origin, setting the gaming world on fire with new titles designed to stimulate and challenge even the most seasoned computer adventurer. Is life becoming a little mundane for
Look at the
you?
animation on that thumb. That's pretty impressive.
Looking for something to put a little spark in your day? Then look no further. You've entered the fantasy world of Ultima 6, the False Prophet. Join us as we celebrate the 10th glorious anniversary of the Ultima series,
best human
letting the
animation
power of the
possible to
Moonstone
do in
teleport you to the world of Britannia
That's enough.
as Lord British opens.
Anyway, that's what was going to change the world. And the scary thing is it actually worked. We did change the world. But I worked on games like this, not a bad record for 7 years at the company. But I moved on again, worked for a company called Looking Glass. I've got too many stories about that, which I will share with you some other time. I started a game company called IonStorm, where I made a game called Deus Ex. Just to tell you a little bit about how life has changed, this was the entire Deus Ex development team. This was in 2000. There were 20-odd people on that team. My last project had over 800, which will tell you how things have changed. That was the entire programming team right there. I don't know how we did it. But we won some awards. We did okay. I left that studio and created Junction Point. I had all sorts of stories to tell about this too, but that's okay. That was my starting team. This has nothing to do with anything except I just think it's funny that it looks like my dog is being eaten by a T-Rex. So I put that up there. Anyway, eventually I started working for Disney. I just spent 7 years working for the Disney Corporation, working on Disney Epic Mickey. But that lasted until 2013 when I left. And now I'm in the world of academia. I'm building a game development program for the University of Texas. If anybody wants some more information, I'm happy to answer questions and hand out flyers and tell you more about it. But why does this matter? Okay, finally. Where are we today? And what makes us art? And I'm not ashamed to say that we are. What makes us different and what makes games matter? Well, for starters, I've seen amazing changes. I mean, we went from games that look like those games in the upper left to games that look even better than the ones that you can hardly see because of the lights down here in the lower right. But we're now at the point where we can make games that are almost photoreal, you know, that do what Hollywood does, except instead of doing it a frame rendered every 30 hours, we do it 30 frames a second. But there's more than that. Like I said, teams were tiny when I started. It was, you know, you could sit alone in your room and make a game. But the last project I worked on, 800 people. So development budgets, development teams have gone up hugely. The quality of our sound, that was the Roland MT32. That was the most amazing thing in the world. Now we put movies to shame with our sound. There was a point, I worked on a game, Ultima 6, that took up 10 megabytes on a hard drive. 10 megabytes. And we were sure that we were going to have to ship a hard drive in a box with every game because no one had a 10 megabyte hard drive. Well, when CDs came out, we all thought we'd never fill one of those up. Holy cow. And now it's like, forget it. We have multiple DVDs. And here's where it starts to get really interesting. We're mainstream now. I have seen changes in graphics, in modes of development, in terms of technology. But as a cultural force, we're no longer at the on the outside looking in. We are the heart of modern culture. At this point, we're way bigger than movies. We're heading very close to a $100 billion business now. It was $92, $93 billion last year. That's the software, not even including the hardware. So we're right at the center of culture. We're bigger than music. We're bigger than Hollywood. People spend more on games now than they do seeing movies or listening to CDs or downloading music. We have millions of players. Everyone is a gamer now. I mean, I would bet that every person in this audience has a little computer in their pocket that's more powerful than the computers we were building games on 5 years ago. And every one of you, I mean, even the people who say they're not gamers have played Poker Online or Candy Crush Saga or Solitaire on a Mac or Klondike on a PC. Everybody's a gamer. Console gamers are a breed apart. But at this point, we're all gamers, whether we define ourselves as gamers or not. But our audience isn't just bigger. It's more diverse than ever. There's no surprise following from the statement that everyone's a gamer that the audience isn't just bigger, it's more diverse. Kids, adults, men, women, even senators play games. I mean, McCain was playing online poker during a committee hearing not too long ago. Nice to know our tax dollars are going to good use. But it's a fact now that more women play games than play men, and the average age of gamers topped 30 years ago. So anybody who thinks of this as kid stuff isn't paying attention. And if all of that weren't proof that we are having a major cultural influence, we're right in the cultural crosshairs. We're the medium that gets blamed for everything. We're even threatened by lawmakers with the threat of censorship. Thank God the Supreme Court came down in our favor, but you know, when Congress goes after you, you know you've made it. But money and cultural credibility, while they're nice, are not enough. There's a big but, okay? To cement our place in the media landscape, there's more we still have to do. From a creative standpoint, there's more we still have to do. And I would argue that to reach our potential, we need to stop thinking about the ways in which we're similar to other media. I mean, lots of people are movie envying wannabes. We have to stop thinking about how we're similar to other media and start thinking about how we're different. We have to start thinking about what makes games unique, what makes us different. And then we have to fully exploit those differences, those unique features, to cement our future. So for me, there are 4 elements of uniqueness. Apologies to people who aren't into the Fantastic Four. There are 4 crucial things that make us unique, I think. The first one is the power to transport. It isn't LeBron James dunking, it's you dunking. It isn't some NASCAR driver turning left all the time, it's you doing that. Hey, I love NASCAR racing, I shouldn't make fun. It's not someone else flying an F-16, it's you flying an F-16. No other medium can send you to another world and make you the actor in that world. No other medium in the history of humankind has been able to do that. We can immerse you in those worlds. We can make you believe that those worlds are real. We can make you forget about the real world for a little while and let you live in a world of our creation, okay? We're at our best when what we do is we remove obstacles to belief. And we're getting better at that all the time. I mean, I don't know if you've been paying attention, but VR is making a comeback now. The Oculus Rift is like the biggest thing since sliced bread, even though they've never released a product yet, which is amazing to me. But once you put on a headset with head tracking and you're actually in that world, it's going to get pretty amazing. No other medium can make you believe you're in an alternate world. We're the first in history. We're the only medium in human history that requires user participation. Without players doing their part, nothing happens. Nothing. Everything just stops. No medium requires direct action on the part of players or users to be complete. That is a way in which we are completely different. Without you participating, without you doing stuff, we cease to exist. And we're the first medium. I'm sorry to keep coming back to first, but we're really unique in the history of humankind to be able to respond to user participation. We're the first medium that's two-way, okay? Developers offer something, a world, a situation, a challenge. You react, you do something, and the game responds. That's totally new. The only thing that comes close is oral storytelling, which just comes close. So what that means is when we're at our best, we can offer players game systems, mechanics. They can exploit however they want. Not the way we want them to, but the way they want to. And that can lead to all sorts of unanticipated events, unanticipated outcomes, all sorts of things that they have to deal with that we couldn't even predict, things that flow naturally from their own decisions and actions. Again, nothing else has ever done this. We're the first medium that's two-way, okay? We turn our users, we turn players into collaborators in the creative process. And that to me is very, very special. The very best gameplay moments are the ones that don't belong to me. They're the ones that belong to all of you, to each of you as you play a game. But for years, media scholars have been saying that all media are interactive, that no medium is passive. And I agree with that up to a point. Viewers of movies and television and readers of books and plays, they have their part in the creation of meaning. I mean, there's no question of that, even in non-interactive media. But without getting too philosophical, I think we can all agree there's something fundamentally different going on when you play a game. And let me talk a little bit about what that is. If I'm reading a book and I set it down for the night, what do you think the odds are the words are going to rearrange themselves while I'm asleep? Probably not going to happen. you know. If I'm watching a TV show and I get up to take a little potty break, the events of that show are going to keep moving along in the way that the creator of that show intended, whether I'm watching it or not. The order and duration of shots in a movie are completely unchanging regardless of your participation in viewing that movie. In a game, that's just not the case. In a game, if I step away from the monitor to get a drink, either everything's going to stop, or the game's going to freeze, or something completely unpredictable and usually bad is going to happen. Okay? Something that not even the creator of that game pre-planned. The game has no existence without active interaction on the part of the player. So interpretive media, which is what I'll call movies, books, you know, TV shows, they're all about the author's intent. You can decide you don't approve of something or you disagree with something. You can determine that a series of events is logical or illogical, but there's nothing you can do to change it. You can't change the action. You can't force events to play out differently. Interactive media are all about the player's intent, not the author's. And they're not about how you interpret something. They're about how you act to precipitate events. Now, the heart of this is not just participating. It's a particular kind of participation, right? The nature of that interaction is critical, and it gets at what I call player intention. It's not just me. I mean, the game theoreticians have been calling it that for years. And it's defined by the player's ability to create meaningful goals. You decide what your goals are. To make a plan, you make the plan, not the designer. Execute your plan to achieve those goals that you've set, and you use the information and resources provided by the game. That is what's defined as player intention. And there are lots of games that do that. I mean, you may have played some of these, you may have heard of some of these. These are all what I call gamey games in that they really allow player intention. Players to formulate plans, execute plans, and then respond to the effects of those plans. So these are just a few of the games. There are lots of them out there. So what makes these games special? They let players make real significant choices. The game responds to those choices. Those choices have real in-game consequences. So there's something important happens based on what you do, how the game responds. And this is the one that's the coolest to me. No two players have the same experience. Every person who plays one of my games will describe a different story. That, I think, is the ultimate. It's your experience, not mine. And that is also something completely new in the world of media. They all kind of define themselves by this. Player experience comes first. They're about your creativity first and foremost. I even think of them as dialogues. When I make a game, it's not just me telling you something. It's me saying something and you saying, hey, here's what I think about that. And then we engage in this virtual dialogue, which I find really exciting. So how do you make it happen? Boy, I could give a whole I could give a whole course on this. So I won't go into that much detail, obviously. But we can provide tools to the player to discover and create gameplay. We can provide a context for player action, and we can sort of put a box around what you can do. We don't necessarily have to determine you will do this, and then you will do this, and then you will do this, and then you will do this. We can sort of say, here's kind of where you are, here's kind of the situation, figure out how you're going to deal with this. I need you to get through that door, but I don't care how you get through that door. That's up to you. It sounds simple. But amazingly, the best summary of that idea came from Orson Scott Card. How many people have read Ender's Game? Oh, you guys need to read Ender's Game. It's a terrific book. Anyway, in 1991, Orson Scott Card summed up everything I think is great about computer games. It's amazing. And he said, there's a long quote, which I won't read you, but he said, why aren't we letting the player decide? He talked about players and creators. He called them game rights, which I wish we called ourselves. I love that word, game rights. You and the player collaborate to create the final story. He said every freedom you can afford the player should feel to you like a victory, and every needless boundary should feel to you like a failure. I just think that's a little bit of genius. But players collaborate to create the final story is what we're all about. So here's what I'll promise. As a creator of games, I will promise that I'm going to give you rules that you can play by. I'm going to give you sounds and images to represent the situation. I'm going to give you tools. That might be a gun, that might be a football, who knows what that is. But I'm going to give you tools to interact with the sounds and images I give you. I'm going to put limits. It sounds like a paradox, but I'm going to give you limits on what you can do. I'm not going to let you kiss every NPC, every non-player character, because I can't deal with that. But I might let you punch them, I might let you talk to them, I might let you push them, but I'm going to limit your choices so they make sense in the context that I deliver. And then I'm going to communicate, get through that door, and then I'm going to stop. Okay, I'm not going to give you your micro goals. So that's the player's part. How do I get through that door? That's up to you as a player. You get to make the plans, you get to execute plans, and then you get to move on to the next challenge. That's all you have to do as a player of a game. Now, when we do that, we start hearing all sorts of different things. Now, there are plenty of games, I probably shouldn't do this, but I'm going to do it anyway. When you play a Tomb Raider game, it's like every single person who plays that game, or a Half-Life game, and I love Tomb Raider, I genuinely do, I'm not just saying that, and I love Half-Life games, but every person who plays those games, when they describe their experience, they'll say something like this. Wasn't it cool when Lara almost missed that jump across that chasm, and then she looked up and there was a Tyrannosaurus Rex, and she pulled her gun, and then she shot the Tyrannosaurus Rex in the mouth? Every player is describing that. Or in a Half-Life game, wasn't it cool when you stepped on that invisible tree? Oh wait, they don't talk about invisible. Wasn't it cool when you walked into that room and the tentacle monster smashed through the glass and grabbed that scientist? Every player describes exactly the same things in exactly the same order in exactly the same ways. In games that I'm describing as gamey, you don't get that kind of description. What you get is people saying, hey, wasn't it cool when you blasted that door off its hinges? And someone else says, wow, I never thought to try that. Or, I always solved that problem another way. Or, wow, wait, you went to a prison? I didn't even know there was a prison in that game. When you get people describing unique experiences, that's how you know you've succeeded. When you get people talking about their experience in unique ways, you've created something really special and something that I think is the future of games. Now, okay. We've definitely opened Pandora's box on our uniqueness as a medium. But we're still struggling with how to do that. I mean, I didn't put up every game that does this sort of player choice and consequence thing that's so important to me. But I put up a lot of them, and there are a lot of people who don't believe it. So we're still struggling to figure out who and what we are as a medium. I've tried to outline what we have done, what we have to do to win that battle for sort of cultural acceptance on a broad scale and for aesthetic acceptance. But I just want to go back a little bit in history and just say we're not the first medium that's had to struggle for acceptance and has struggled to discover what it's all about. I mean, if you go back to the 16th century, you'll discover that a lot of people thought Shakespeare was a lowlife, who made really racy plays for the lowest dregs of society. There was one contemporary report that said, who is this Shakespeare who thinks he can bombast out a blank verse? Now we know better, 400 years later, 500 years later. But back then, no one was sure what was important and what was not. No one knew that Shakespeare was going to be around, remembered 500 years later. Novels, everybody knows novels are worth studying and they're worth taking seriously and they're aesthetically very well established. But there was a time when people said, novels, people shouldn't be indoors reading, they should be out living life, not reading about it, obviously. Movies started out as film stage plays. They were blamed for every social ill imaginable, which I'm sure we'll come back to in the Q&A period. It's only in the last 40 years or so that people have started taking movies seriously and considered them an art form that's worthy of serious study and protection from censorship. And then, of course, everybody's favorite, comic books. If you don't know who Frederick Wertham is, it's worth looking him up. He wrote a book called Seduction of the Innocent that sparked congressional hearings about how comic books were going to destroy the youth of America. Every medium takes time to discover its uniqueness, and every medium takes time to get past that. Adults know these are dangerous things. I mean, whatever the adults grew up with is fine and good. Whatever kids grew up with is dangerous and scary. It's a lesson we never seem to learn. But remember, no one knows anything, right? So who knows what's important? We're still, to some extent, no matter how big our audience is and no matter whether everybody's a gamer or not, we're still an outsider activity. And we need to move to becoming an insider activity. But I'm really not worried about that because, frankly, the Grim Reaper is going to take care of that. When everybody is a TV watcher, no one worries that much about TV effects anymore. When everybody loves movies, no one thinks movies are damaging anymore. When everybody's a gamer, which will happen eventually, when literally everyone is a gamer, no one's going to know that no one's going to think it's dangerous because everybody knows they grew up with it and they grew up fine. So there. Okay, so our future is to go completely mainstream, and the mainstream of gaming is well underway. And here's why that's a good thing. Increased numbers means increased safety. I mean, there are plenty of reasons to welcome grandma into the world of games and little sister into the community of gamers. Surrounded by gamers, we're going to be able to fend off attacks. We're going to be better able to exploit all of those characteristics I was talking about before. And with a more diverse audience, this is the most important one. With a more diverse audience, we're going to have more diversity of content. And that, I think, is critical to our future as a medium as well. A game like this would have been unthinkable even 5 years ago. But now, it's perfectly reasonable to have games like Farmville played on social networks like Facebook. And that means that we're not stuck in a world of knives and guns and broadswords to kill dragons and space marines saving the world from alien invasion. We can be something more than that now. How many people played this game in the last week? I mean, come on. Yeah. Everybody plays, okay, I shouldn't say everybody. Lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of people. I mean, you played Candy Crush Saga. And there's room for a game like this now, which was not the case 5 years ago. There's room for a game like World of Warcraft. Anybody play World of Warcraft in here? Boy, you're just not a bunch of gamers. Brian, I need to turn you all into gamers. But at its peak, this was played by over 13 million people around the world. My wife, I was joking about this earlier, and it's still true at this moment. My wife is playing right this minute with her friend who's a mom in Czechoslovakia, or the Czech Republic, or Yugoslavia, somewhere over there. She's got friends who are in college, all because of World of Warcraft. It's amazing. But there's room for that in the world of gaming now. There's room. Anybody played Papers, Please? All right, we got a couple. There's room for indie retro games like Papers, Please, made basically by a guy alone in a room. There's room for cinematic games. I was making fun of people who have movie envy. But if there's someone in the room who's not a gamer, yep, I'm looking at you, Duck Baron. This is a great place to start. It's an unabashedly cinematic experience. It's not what I would describe as the future of games, but it's part of a future of games. And that's important. There's so much going on right now. There's room for emotional journeys in gaming now. And yeah, there's still room for big guys with guns shooting a bunch of stuff. But that diversity of content comes only because we have such a diverse and enormous audience now. And that's the coolest thing that's happening in games today. I get asked all the time, what's the most important thing happening in gaming? And my answer is always the same. Everything is happening today. Everything is happening in gaming. We have big games on consoles. We have MMOs played on PCs. We have indie games played on PCs, downloaded to your hard drive. We have puzzle games on smartphones. We have social games played on social media game sites. Everything is happening, and no one knows what the future is. It's astonishing, and this really is a golden age. If you haven't discovered games yet, this is a great time because no matter what your interests are, there's a game out there that I think will captivate you. So at the end of the day, there are a handful of things I hope you'll take when you leave this room. First, games are important. They enrich people's lives, a lot of people. They fatten a lot of people's wallets. Thank you for paying my mortgage. They are central to Western culture now. If you're not paying attention to games, you are missing out on what is arguably the most important cultural force in Western civilization. And I don't say that lightly. Go over to Korea, go over to China. If you want to see a gaming culture, it's just unbelievable. It's not just Western culture, it's now world culture. As a communications studies department, this needs to be taken seriously. And I think it's important. We are, as I said, I'm so stupid. I said this, I went up to Pixar. I worked for Disney, which owns Pixar, so I used to go up there once in a while, and they asked me to lecture about video games. And I said, movies are the medium of the 20th century, and we're the medium of the 21st. And it was like, I heard crickets. It was unbelievable. Their jaws hit the ground. It was horrible. But we are the medium of the 21st century. And the fact is, no one knows where we're going to go. I've just outlined what I think is what makes us unique. There's someone out there working in a garage who has an idea that I can't even imagine that is a big part of the future of gaming. No one knows. Is the future hyper-real AAA boxed games sold at retail? Yeah, sure. Is the future of games abstract, retro, indie games? Yeah, probably, you know. Is it social games or mobile games played for free, supported by microtransactions? I hope not, but probably. You know, no one knows. And that means something really important. That means that creativity trumps cash. If you're a game developer or you have a game idea right now, oh my God, there could not be a better time, because the guys at Electronic Arts, which is, you know, one of the 800-pound gorillas in my business, EA, Ubisoft, Activision, Blizzard, Disney, Zynga, Google, Apple, they have no idea what they're doing. Everybody's making it up. It's a total frontier. It's absolutely true. There is a frontier out there. Games are everywhere. Games of all sorts are everywhere. And because it's a wilderness, it means that one person, one man, one woman can change the world, just like it was back when I started, back in the 70s and 80s and early 90s. The world was completely changeable because no one knew what they were doing. And after years of frankly, stagnation on the business side, now if you have an idea, you can execute on that idea, you can make a game, you can reach an audience with that idea, and you may be able to change the world. It is a great time to be a game developer, because the reality is the geek have inherited the earth and we're not giving it back. So there you go. That's what I got. And I'm happy to take questions. Any questions? Yeah.
The role basically gender in video games, is that moving away from like the movies are, or is that just kind of right with it? Like when it comes to women in video games?
Yeah, what's the story with women in video games? That's both a sad story and one that's not so sad. The reality is very, very few women even apply for jobs in the video game business because it's such a good old boy network. You know, it's a real, it's tough for women in the game business. In my last studio, I had 200 people, and there were probably a dozen women at the studio. It was horrible. You can't hire people who don't apply, but as a culture, as a development culture, we really have a long way to go to make it more inviting. And I think people are starting to do that. There are certainly a lot more women in gaming now. There are women in gaming special interest groups as part of the International Game Developers Association. So there are strides being made. Where we're really making strides and where the real change is going to come is in the audience. Like I said, more women play games now than men. And it's not just, you know, solitaire. I mean, more women play real games than men now. And when you get women playing games, they're going to start insisting on a different kind of content because, dear God, I hope it's true that they don't want to be the last Space Marine between the Earth and alien invasion. You know, I mean, we've had enough games like that, and I hope they want different content. And with different content is going to come different developers, and over time, I think that's going to change. It has to change faster.
What about character-wise when it comes to
Oh.
you know, how they perceive, you know.
Boy, you're asking the tough questions, aren't you? I think there's such a backlash now. I mean, I'm really happy to see there was a game recently called Lollipop Chainsaw. I don't know if you saw that. It was exactly what you think it is, and it was the presentation of women was absolutely hideous in that game. They insisted that it was political satire, which is nonsense. It was just offensive to anybody with a brain. We need to do better. We need to do better. And I'd be lying if I said I thought we were doing well enough. Still plenty of room. But you can come in and change that, you know? Any other questions? No, let's go in the back here. I'll come back. Yeah, yeah.
You touched a little bit upon lawmakers and how they are cracking down on gaming in a lot of senses. How do you feel about, I think we just talked a little more in depth about how the accusations around games influence tragedies such as Newtown or
Yeah. I'm glad you asked that. There are certainly two schools of thought on that, and I'm going to get into a big argument with... Oh, repeat the question. I'm sorry. Right. Okay. What about the effects argument? There are people who say that games cause behaviors and inspire, you know, tragedies. I think there are two schools of thought, like I said. There is certainly a school of thought that believes that media of all sorts have direct effects. And I agree with that up to a point. My argument is that some media have some effects on some people at some times under some circumstances. It's indisputable. I mean, it is a fact. Simplifying that to this medium caused this event, I think is too simple, because the reality is for every tragedy of the sort that seems to be caused by video game violence, there are tens of millions of people who are not influenced in that way. There's very little look, I mean, I think you need to look at the context in which people play and in which they don't play. There are certainly bullying issues that go into a lot of the tragedies that we've had. When I was at TSR, before video games, traditional tabletop role-playing game was the medium that was blamed for everything in the world. I mean, and it's really true. Every medium, movies were blamed for everything. Rock and roll music was blamed for everything. Pinball parlors were blamed for everything. Comics were blamed for everything. TV was blamed for everything. Cartoon. My mom thought the Three Stooges and Bugs Bunny were going to turn me into a juvenile delinquent. I mean, she really believed that stuff. And we're in the cultural crosshairs. But when I was at TSR working on Dungeons and Dragons, that was around the time that a kid named Dallas Egbert at the University of Michigan he committed suicide. And it's a tragedy.
Mic check.
But it got blamed on D&D and didn't look at, did the guy play football? More people commit suicide who play football than play video games. I mean, people need to look at the bigger picture and not just focus in on one medium. And they need to look at context much more closely. It's a much more nuanced thing than a lot of people want to think about. So have we had negative impact? I think getting back to the point about women in games, as represented in games, I think we've very successfully done a lot to coarsen the culture. I think the kinds of content that we've delivered is kind of hideous, frankly. I mean, there's a game, Grand Theft Auto. I don't know if you've seen. We're up to the 5th installment of that. And it's one of the best designed games in the world. I would love to be able to hold it up as an example of great game design. And I can't because its content is reprehensible. So I think we've gone a long way to coarsen the culture. But there's a long, long leap from that to playing games causes violent behavior. I can't go that far. Yeah.
Hang on.
Oh, we have a mic.
Mic now. So is your question? Yeah, go ahead.
Okay,
All right. I'm just going to sort of hang out over here and pass it around.
Okay.
thanks.
Trust that you're live.
Is this thing on?
Yes, it is.
So sometimes Hollywood tries to make movies out of video games, and fans of the video games tend to hate them.
That's because they're terrible games. I mean, terrible movies. Not terrible games. They're great games, terrible movies. Sorry, go ahead.
Why do you think why do you think those movies, video game movies, tend to miss the mark so often?
I think there are two reasons why video game movies typically aren't very good. Let me be generous. The first reason, I've actually spent a fair amount of time in Hollywood. When I started Junction Point Studios, my goal was to create a studio that would collaborate with guys in Hollywood to make game movie collaborations. So we would create something that would work in both media. And I can't talk about a lot of that, but I did work with John Woo, the film director John Woo, and we created a property that would work in both media and had a movie deal and a game deal and the whole 9 yards. That might have worked because I respect video games. I understand them. I know what makes them tick. And in Hollywood, most people don't. I think they think, oh, it's just a story, I'll just tell a story, and they don't understand what makes game stories different and unique and wonderful. They just don't respect the medium enough. They just see it as another source of content, and it's more than that. They don't respect the medium. I think that's part of it. Part of it is that we are different media. I mean, that was my point, that it's important that we think of ourselves as unique and not just as a content feeder for some other medium or something that imitates other media. Yeah, I think it's largely just they don't understand what we do for a living, you know? Yeah. Sure. Oh, well, okay, we'll start over there, and then we'll move down here.
Kind of similar to the question before regarding video games causing like violent behavior, but obviously, like first and foremost is I agree with the fact that like you can't wholly blame video games by itself. I mean, I feel like, but it also can be a reason, not just the reason. But like in the process of making it, is just like somewhat completely disregarded that it can be a reason of somebody losing their life or spending the rest of their life in prison because of it having an impact, not the key role, but an impact? Is that disregarded? And do you think that like it's pretty much just profit driven? Because I mean, money runs everything. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, like you said, thank you for paying my mortgage. Like, I mean,
I was
if
joking, by the way.
I mean, but let's be real. Like, it runs everything, and like, is that like completely disregarded that they can be a reason for one person ending the lives of many because one person can't distinguish that like a video game shouldn't be the reason for that? But there are some people who are smart enough to know that like know right from wrong.
Sure.
And
You know, as a creator of I hope, interesting and appealing content, it's hard to get down to thinking about one person, you know. If you stop to think about every individual who plays your games, you'd probably never make a game. And the incidents, I mean, look at it this way. More people die of gun violence in Chicago every day than have ever been killed in a game-related tragedy, you know. I mean, that's the real problem. I don't want to get into politics here, but that's the real problem we have to be dealing with. The glorification of violence in media is a real problem, but it's a cultural problem, not a behavioral problem in my mind. And I don't want to overstate this, but don't yourself overstate the importance of money in driving decisions. I mean, I have a saying that my only obligation to the person funding my game is to sell one more copy of that game than I need to get someone to fund my next one. I could care less about, you know, maximum profit, you know, revenue generation and maximum profitability and all, you know, all that stuff. I could care less about it. And the guy who made Papers, Please wasn't thinking about that at all, I guarantee it. And if you want to, there are plenty of games out there, if you seek them out, that are not, you know, the good old ultra-violence. There are plenty of games. Go play Papers, Please. Play Disney Epic Mickey, the last game I made, you know. You might enjoy being Mickey Mouse for a little while. You never know. I mean, play Journey, a game that is just stunning in its emotional, the emotions that it can elicit from you. If you go looking for them, you can find plenty of games that are not driven by the profit motive, and that I mean, couldn't cause violence if they wanted to. So I think you have to look at the breadth of content and not get too hung up on one particular kind of game, or one individual player for that matter.
I was wondering about your thoughts on the rise of esports and the validity of competitive gaming.
Oh, okay. Oh God, I thought it was going to be a longer question. Sorry. The importance of esports, yeah. I'm on kind of shaky ground here because I've only made one game that had any multiplayer component at all, so I've never been able to enjoy seeing that as part of a game that I've worked on. But esports are getting huge now. I mean, I've been working with an organization called TESPA, which is the Esports Association, and they get, I mean, millions of people watching live feeds of games now. It's becoming a legitimate sporting activity. I mean, obviously not quite as active as, you know, getting out on a field or on a court and doing something, but there are plenty of people out there now making a living playing games, which is astonishing to me. And I think, you know, you're going to see with companies like Blizzard being so dramatically behind that kind of activity, and multiple competing organizations that are putting on events like that, I think you're going to see a lot more competitive gaming. And again, like I was saying, check out Korea sometime. I mean, it's just unbelievable the kinds of competitions they have there. So I think it's an ever-growing part of our business for sure.
In a positive way, right?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. No, I think anything I mean, to my mind, I believe that games are the medium of the 21st century, right? I just got done saying that. I think anything that brings more people into it to see the joy and the wonder and the magic of gaming, I think that's all to the good. And competitive. I mean, we all have competitive juices, right? Anything that lets us gives us an outlet for that is a good thing. Sure.
Hi.
Hi.
So you were talking a lot about open playing games like Skyrim. What do you feel about like randomly generated maps like Minecraft and Serve Contain Protect, where every time you start a new game, you have a new map to explore?
Randomly generated content is really interesting. I think at least today, it still has some limits on the sort of sophistication of the stories, the interactive stories you can tell. And so I don't have a lot of interest in it personally, but games that are replayable typically provide unique experiences to players, and that's the key for me. I mean, my success criterion is not making a ton of money. It's when you describe your play experience, is it different from mine? And randomly generated maps. I mean, Diablo started that. I mean, NetHack, for crying out loud. You know, randomly generated dungeons and randomly generated levels go back a long way. And I think they're wonderful. They just don't allow the sophisticated storytelling that I want to do personally, but I'm glad they exist. And I'd rather see that, just to be judgmental for a minute, I'd rather see that than a game that you play once and you never think of again because it can never change because the choices are fake and you know, it's just a branching tree that tells the same story over and over again. Five movie scripts joined together is not a great game to me. You know, yeah, I got a whole lecture about that too.
Back
Any
to
other
the
questions?
soundboard or the light board. You had a question, right? Oh no, I called on you though. So
Lay it on me.
Can you come forward a little bit? Take the mic, and then whoever had it next, you can hand, or also have your hand up. You can hand it.
You guys ask tough questions, by the way. I'm impressed.
Hi.
Hi.
I was just wondering if you could touch base, because you seem to have worked with different sizes of groups to produce video games and stuff. So, like, what did you find? Like, you said you just worked with a group of 800. Like, that's just massive. So
Never going to do it again.
Okay, that kind of answers my question. Like, what are the pros and cons of larger and smaller groups?
Well, a smaller, all of the advantages are in a smaller group. When you're all sitting in a room together, the creative juices just flow, and the conversation just flows, and everybody is really collaborating to create an experience. There's something unbelievably magical about that. Yeah, I mean, once you get above 10 or 12, all of a sudden you're sitting next to someone you hate, and programmer number 3 wants to add a feature that doesn't fit in with the game you're making, but she thinks it does. And, so 800 is too many. But realistically, even before that, the game I did before that had a team of about 180, and before that I was dealing with teams of 90. Even at that, when it's hard to remember everybody's name. I mean, at my own studio, I didn't know everybody's name. That's sad. That's really sad. And you get so far from the game that even though you're the person behind the wheel, you're saying, take that hill. You're standing up on another hill watching everybody do all the fun stuff. So the advantage of a big team, boy, you can crank out a lot of content. I couldn't have made a Mickey Mouse game with the quality level and the number of assets that requires. I couldn't have made that with a team of 10. It would have been ludicrous. So there are things you just can't do with a small team that require a big team. Again, just speaking personally, I'm just not very interested in doing that anymore. If I were doing something, it'd be a lot more like Papers, Please than like Disney Epic Mickey. Yeah.
Well, kind of piggybacking off that, how long does it take to make a game, like from start to finish?
How long does it take to make a game? That varies just as much as there are, as many games as there are to make. It differs. I know people who do game jams and create games in 2 days. Those are not usually commercially viable games, but it has been done. I know people who've made commercially viable games in as little as 3 months. My games take about 3 years. And I always tell all of my publishers, the first thing I tell them when I sit down, I've been really lucky. I've always gotten to make the games I want to make the way I want to make them, and I recognize that makes me the luckiest man in show business. But I always tell publishers and funding partners, you know, I make the games I want to make. I make them the way I want to make them, and they take 3 years. If I tell you I'm going to make a game in 2 years, I'm lying. I mean, I'm just lying to you. Don't listen to me. Don't pay attention. And if they don't want to work with me, that's fine. I'll find someone else, you know. So my games take about 3 years to make. It's horrible. I don't ever want to do that again either.
Just had a quick question. So I was wondering if you could just talk about the discussion debates that go on with video games, because I don't know if this is a fair comparison, but like I'm thinking of like TV shows and movies where there's like surprise twists or endings, and it's like, oh, I can't wait for the next episode, or I can't wait for the next movie to come out. But I feel like with video games, besides like maybe the Halos, I don't know how many Halos there are, but like it's just a video game and then that's it, and then it'll be talked about for maybe like a week or two, and then I don't know how far it goes. So.
Yeah, that's not true anymore. You know, we used to have what a lot of people call fire and forget games, where you spend 3 years making a game, you put it on a disc, in a box, sell it at retail, and you're done. Nowadays, with user-generated content and downloadable content, you really have to create a community around your game, and you have to keep them coming back for more. I mean, even look at Candy Crush Saga. I mean, people play that for months and months and months and spend thousands of dollars, literally thousands of dollars, solving silly little puzzles. So I don't think that's as true as it used to be, but even in the games that I made, I've been making single-player games in a box on a shelf, and I would follow the boards for months at a time. So I don't think it was ever really as true or as hard and fast a rule as you're talking about. The other thing that's going on now, I put a slide up earlier that showed The Walking Dead. That's a digitally distributed episodic game with a new episode coming out, you know, every month. And I think people look at that in the same way they do a television show. I mean, if you're not a gamer, go check out The Walking Dead. The first episode is free. It's a very low effort, low skill game, but really high impact. It's totally worth playing. And if you like that first episode, you can buy subsequent episodes, or you can subscribe. And I think that's a large part of our future.
What is your favorite video game you've ever played, and why?
There are a bunch of ways to answer the favorite video game question. So if you ask me if I could only play one game ever for the rest of my life, you know, the desert island question, it'd be Tetris. Because the game plays differently every single time you play it. You can never get bored with it. I mean, name another game that's been on every single gaming platform ever in the history of mankind. You know, there's a reason why people still play Tetris 157 years after it first came out. Oh, it wasn't that long. But anyway, you know, so probably Tetris. If you ask me what game gave me the most joy the first time I played it, it'd be Legend of Zelda: Link to the Past. I loved that game, and I've played that on every platform since because it keeps coming out. If you ask me what's the most influential game, which is another way to measure, you know, what's the best game, that's a tougher one. It might be Star Raiders. Influential on me might be Star Raiders, might be Ultima 4. Yeah, I don't know. That's a tougher one for me, but you know, there are a handful of games that changed the world of gaming, and those are a couple of them. But I don't know if that answered your question. That's the best I can do. Yeah.
So, I'm thinking about last summer's E3 and the reveal events of the two new consoles, the PS4 and the Xbox One. A lot of people had very controversial thoughts about the Xbox One, like it pretty much exploded all over the internet when it first revealed. And now that it's released, it seems like everything's different now compared to a few years ago. What do you think is like the future of console wars?
You know, prediction is a fool's game. Luckily, I'm a fool. I honestly think consoles are not going to be around forever. I mean, the console is going to be your set-top box, and maybe it'll be a Microsoft box, maybe it'll be an Apple box, maybe it'll be an Amazon box, maybe it'll be an Ouya, maybe it'll be, I mean, who knows? But I don't see much of a future for consoles per se. I think PCs are going to make a comeback because of digital distribution. I think You're going to have one box that does everything for you. And I think that's one of the reasons why people have kind of changed their tune on the Xbox One, because the PlayStation 4 is very much I don't want to overstate this either, but it's a game console, and the Xbox One is you own your living room. The problem for the Xbox One is I already have an Apple TV, I already have a DVR, I already have infinite ways to stream movies from Netflix and Amazon Prime, and they're up against some pretty stiff competition for owning the living room. So I don't know. I don't think you're going to see standalone dedicated game consoles for much longer. And you can all look back in 5 years and tell me what an idiot I was.
Question back here.
Yeah, I was just going to wonder about your thoughts on how these like AAA titles that come out year after year, like the Call of Duties and the Battlefield, how they have these huge marketing budgets behind them of like millions of dollars. How do you think that's going to kind of affect the like gaming industry going forward for these indie developers who really have no marketing budget? And there's very few, I feel, indie games now that make it kind of to the main stage. Like, I mean, there's Minecraft, which is huge now.
Yeah,
but how do you think?
Okay, that's the exception to the rule. Let's not even think about Minecraft.
But I mean, how do you think it's kind of going to affect the industry going forward if Call of Duty can come out year after year with millions of dollars behind it, and these indie developers are kind of struggling to get their game noticed?
Well, I think that's a great question. The reality is, it's not just the Call of Duties that have those big marketing budgets. I won't even tell you how much marketing money went into Disney Epic Mickey and Disney Epic Mickey: The Power of Two. I mean, I just won't. It's an embarrassingly large number. Every console title requires that in order to have any chance of success. And I think at the end of the day, again, I'm making predictions again. I think you're going to see a lot fewer games like that, because I said this earlier today when I spoke in a class. 80% of games lose money, and of the 20% that make money, 20% make 80% of the money. So you've got this tiny little sliver of games out of the last E3, there were 2,500 games debuted at that show, according to the ESA. I mean, 2,500, 20% of them are going to make some money, and 20% of them are going to make 80% of the money. I mean, you're going to see a lot fewer AAA titles being made moving forward, and you're going to see a lot more smaller indie games. How do they get noticed? That's a really great question. I think you have to be a social media guru to be an indie developer these days. I think you need to find a way to get noticed by Apple on the on the App Store. It's tough. I mean, that's why whenever I hear somebody who saying they want to do a startup and do mobile games, the first question I ask is how are you going to reach an audience? Who's your audience? How are you going to get to them? Because if you can't do that, you're just making a game for yourself, and that may be fine. That may be exactly what you want to do. As like I was saying earlier, getting 4 people or 10 people even in a room together making a game it's a genuinely joyful experience. A lot of hard work, but it's joyful. And that may be enough for you, but you have to know how you're going to reach an audience and what's going to make you stand out. And that's tough. That's tough. I mean, like John Blow, who did Braid. I mean, the number of interviews that guy did, oh my God. Because he knew he needed to be noticed. You have to be willing to do that. And even then, you're probably going to fail, but most games fail. Have I worn you out?
Hi. Do you have children?
I do not.
No.
Sadly.
If you
No,
did,
the children I have are the ones who work for me.
Gotcha. If you did, would you set any restrictions as to what it is they play?
Of course.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, look, it's like any medium. Parents. The reality is, the video game business has what I think is the most effective rating system of any of the media. I mean, we tell people what kind of content. We tell people why, what they're going to experience. We tell people what age groups that we think a game is appropriate for. We have a really, really good rating system, and parents should use that. I mean, they know their kids better than I do. They know what their kid is capable of dealing with. I mean, my dad took me to see horror movies when I was 3 years old, and I loved it. He knew I could take it. But other 3-year-olds might not be like that. So I think if I were a parent, I would absolutely restrict my kids' game playing. Probably less than you think. Because I mean, again, I grew up with all this stuff that my mom thought was going to destroy me, and it didn't. And so I kind of have the sense that games are the same thing. They seem dangerous to people who don't play them. You know, but they're really not. They're really not. Kids, I was pretty good. I knew that Bugs Bunny wasn't real from a very early age. And I knew the Three Stooges weren't really hurting each other. And I knew that the dragon, you know, the big monkey in King Kong wasn't real. And I think kids are way better at recognizing what's real and what's not than a lot of people give them credit for. So I would restrict them, but not as much as you think. I have to take a drink now. I'm happy to keep answering questions.
Sorry, it's a right. So before I came here, I downloaded an article which says video games in education. So because I teach in the science, I'm a professor in the science department, and the last part of the abstract says, so it's in theory into practice, says that this article provides a practical rationale for and experiences with integrating video games into right up to K till 20 kindergarten through graduate school curriculum. So my question is, how are video games integrated with education, considering that it's a very big industry, and how can it help education, considering that if kids spend 2 to 3 hours of their time in front of a gaming console, if so, how can gaming break into the education industry?
Well, I think games have already done a pretty effective job. I mean, there's a school in New York City, I think it's K through 12, that is, the entire curriculum is based around games. You know, face-to-face games, video games, computer games. So there's that kind of integrating games into the educational process. We're pretty good at training. We're pretty good at teaching people, you know, do this, then do this, then do this. We're not good at skill training, but we're good at process training. I think there's a lot of good work that can be done there. Oh man, I had a great answer and it just went out of my head. Hold on, give me a second. But in a sense, because what we're doing is presenting challenges to players and then letting them determine how to get past them, I think we're teaching a fairly important skill that's necessary in the real world. You know, problem-solving skills, that's what games are all about. Even if all you're doing is guessing the solution to a puzzle, you're dealing with a problem-solving experience. I know for a fact that games are being used to help stutterers get past stuttering. They're being used to help people learn how to deal with diabetes. There are many games now that teach people about dealing with cancer. Games are being used already in a variety of educational contexts very effectively and in surprising ways, I think. There's a lot more to talk about there, but I think finding the right content and applying some real pedagogical rigor to it. I'm about to become an educator, and maybe I was working on my doctorate and teaching a little bit, but I'm not an educator per se, and we need to collaborate with people who are to be more effective at doing that. And I'll give you another. I mean, honestly, as crazy as it sounds, games can inspire learning. Not necessarily used to teach explicitly, but I mean, when I was playing D&D, this is going to sound nuts, but when I was playing D&D, one of the worlds in which my games were set was ancient Japan, and I learned more about about Japanese culture playing that game than I ever did from any course I ever took or any book I ever read. You know, I mean, in the games that I've made, I've had to know how World War I biplanes fly and what the difference is between an inline engine and a radial engine in terms of flight characteristics. I've had to know how a medieval castle works on a daily basis. You know, that can inspire an interest in history. That can inspire an interest in foreign cultures. That can inspire us to go to learning. In terms of STEM, I mean, you know, science, technology, and math, engineering and math. I mean, guess what? Games are software. Games are math. Games are physics. And so you want to teach someone that stuff? Why would you go back to a 19th century educational mode and drag people kicking and screaming to math when you could have them make a game, which is just software? Have them build a game, and they will come screaming, running to you, please let me make a game, and they won't even realize they're being taught programming, math, science. You know, they're learning that stuff as a result of making games. So there's that educational aspect as well. So I think we're a really valuable educational tool, and I think you're seeing that more and more. Even in commercial products, you're seeing that.
Because you have a program which is going to start running at the University of Texas, which is
Mhm.
a university.
Yeah.
So it's not exactly a industry, it's an educational institute. So is there an imperative or is there a prerogative for you to develop a program which caters to the education side of things directly?
Well, it would be my prerogative to do that, but it's not my priority. I will say that I've been talking to some folks at the university about the first class possibly making an educational game for a variety of reasons. I mean, and that is a really cool one. That might happen, but the more interesting question you didn't ask that I will answer now is, don't single out the University of Texas, because according to the Entertainment Software Association, which did a survey, there are, including the University of Texas, there are 385 colleges and universities teaching either game courses or entire game programs in the United States alone. So it's not just me. I mean, there are lots of places to go to. If you want educational games, the University of Wisconsin-Madison is doing some really interesting stuff. But there are lots of educational institutions that are focusing on that. There's a Games for Change movement. There are all sorts of places where you can talk to people far more knowledgeable than me about education and games.
This is not going to be as hard as my first one, but I've always had a
Lay
debate
it
with.
on me. Bring it. Come
well,
on.
me and my cousin are suckers for old games, and we always had the debate which was better, Mario 64 or Donkey Kong 64. Could you answer that?
Mario 64. Come on.
Okay. Well,
That
I
was
always.
way better than Donkey Kong.
I don't know. I liked Donkey Kong growing up, but thank you for answering.
Mario 64, it's this sort of semi-open world. You're actually exploring the place. You're not just going boink, 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 boink. Come on. Easy.
I know you kind of touched on it in the presentation, but you talked a bit about how like the VR is going to be kind of where the video games are going. And I just know the Oculus Rift was bought by Facebook, I think, a couple weeks back. Just kind of, what are your
$2
thoughts?
billion, yes.
What are
I
your
have friends
thoughts?
there. I don't think they're my friends anymore.
Just what are your thoughts next? I know there was a big group behind it, people who are developing a bunch of kind of add-ons for it. I know there was like a treadmill thing coming out for it and different things. I mean, how do you think that's going to kind of shape up how the Oculus Rift is going to be used?
Well,
in the
it's
industry?
interesting. I did, I'm going to date myself here. In 1994, I made 2 games that supported every VR headset that was available back then. And this is about the 5th time VR has been the future of gaming, by the way. And it just passed. It was a fad. I fear that might happen again. I'm not sure. I mean, who in this room really wants to put a goofy scuba mask on their head and then stand there and look around? I mean, until someone solves the how do you walk around problem, and until someone really figures out how to do AR stuff, augmented reality stuff that doesn't require putting a big bulky thing on your head, I think it's going to be a fad. I know that's an unpopular opinion, and I'm sorry, Oculus friends, but I just don't see a peripheral driving much of anything. I mean, look, the bottom line is there are 1 billion of these in people's pockets, 1 billion in the world. There are going to be, what, 5 million, if they're lucky, 5 million Oculus Rifts in the world? Why would I not make games for this? So I think there's going to be an incredible niche for it. I have no idea why anybody paid $2 billion for it. It's just 3D was the future of games about 3 years ago. Now it's VR. Nobody knows. I could be dead wrong. It might be the future. I have no idea. One more. How much time do we have? Holy cow. It's still on, trust me.
So if you had to choose from, this is similar to an earlier question about your favorite video game. If you had to choose out of only the ones that you worked on, what would be your favorite then?
Which
and
of
why?
my children do I love the best? Is that what you're asking? Yeah. Okay, I'm not going to give you the single game answer you want. Believe it or not, the game I'm most proud of is Disney Epic Mickey, the first Disney Epic Mickey game. Not because it was necessarily the greatest game I ever worked on, but because I got more and more heartfelt fan mail about that game than anything else I've ever worked on. It sold better than anything I ever worked on too, which is nice. But you would not believe the fan mail I got. I mean, I would open up envelopes and there'd be a drawing in there and a letter from a parent saying, my 16-year-old daughter is autistic and doesn't interact with the world, and she was inspired to draw this and insisted that I send it to you. You know, holy cow. My 14-year-old son has cystic fibrosis and is going in for surgery and wants to know if he can use your game as part of his physical therapy. You know, that's pretty powerful stuff. So I'm really proud of that. Every game is a disappointment. If you like anything you've worked on, you're not thinking about it hard enough. But you know, usually what happens at the beginning of a project, you close your eyes and you imagine what a game is going to be, and then 3 years later you open it up, you open your eyes up, and it's completely different. It's nothing like what you thought it was going to be. But Deus Ex was a game that I worked on that I closed my eyes in 1997, and I opened my eyes in 2000, and even though every detail had changed, it was exactly the game I imagined. I mean, the team came through and changed absolutely every detail, but they so totally nailed the spirit of that game that I wanted, and the feeling I wanted, and what I wanted that game to play like. I mean, it was, I'm blown away by that, because it's the only time in my life I've done that. And then I worked on a game called Underworld, which I can't take too much credit for. It was done by an amazing group of people at Blue Sky Productions, and I was the producer on it. And that was the very first fully textured, real-time 3D first-person game ever. And it doesn't get credit for that, which is sad. But I'm really proud, because all of the BioShocks and System Shocks and Skyrims and everything else, they all came from that seed way back in 1991. So I'm pretty proud of that too. It's the closest to an answer you're going to get about which of my children I love the most.
I'm not sure how well you know him or personally at all, but I was wondering if you have a few words to describe Gabe Newell.
Gabe is a force of nature. I know him pretty well. He is a force of nature, and very driven, let's just say, and very sure of himself. And let me just stop there.
Okay.
No, Gabe he's an amazing person. I'm glad I know him. Is that a question or a stretch? Oh, okay.
Hello. So my brother is 17, and he's been creating and working with video games since he's been 10. He's really smart with all that. But he takes games and he doesn't like how they end or like how they work, so he'll create his own levels with them or find his own little, like, yeah, he wants to go to school for it. But do you ever find yourself when you play other people's video games that you want to critique them or change something, or just wish you could completely alter it?
You should have been at my talk earlier today. Yes. Yeah. When I scream at the screen when I play games. I mean, I am a screamer. What I was saying to the class earlier today is my entire process is, I won't give you the whole process, but it almost always starts with frustration. I'm playing a game and it's, oh my God, this is so conventional. How could they do this? We can't keep making games just because that's the way we've always made games. Or, oh my God, how could they make this decision? This story sucks. You know, or this game mechanic is terrible. This UI sucks. You know, I mean, and that's what drives me to make the games I want to make. I mean, I'm lucky. I don't have to just complain about it or write about it. I get to make games that show other people up. You know, I mean, when I made Deus Ex, I didn't tell the team this at the time, but I've told people since. About half of my goal with Deus Ex was to shame other developers. I mean, I wanted them to be ashamed if they ever made games like they were making before that game came out. And it kind of worked. I don't know. it kind of worked out okay. So yeah, I get frustrated all the time and want to do things differently. I just get to do it. I think we're done. Good night, Warren. Yeah, thanks for coming. Yeah.
Be sure to sign in if you have not.
Oh, if you're interested in my game development program at the University of Texas, I have sign-up sheets here. I'll send you more information. I'm happy to do that. Just let me know.
Very, very interesting talk.
Oh, thanks.
So I was at Yale for 2 years, at MIT